Hello, and welcome to Global Journalist. I'm Byron Scott, your host for this week's discussion of world news events by professionals whose job it is to report the facts and analyze the consequences. Just how much did you pay the last time you filled up the gas tank? If the answer is don't ask, you'll want to listen to today's discussion. The civil war in Libya and disturbances seemingly all over the Arab world have coincided with the sharpest rise in prices since 2008. Yet the numbers just don't seem to add up to pain at the pump. Libya produces less than 1% of the world's crude oil, while Russia and Saudi Arabia currently boast of excess capacity. What combination of petropolitics, global uneasiness, and perhaps speculation are spiking oil prices? Here to help us understand are four journalists who have been covering the complex story from different nations and different perspectives. In Los Angeles, Eric Watkins, oil diplomacy editor for the industry's respected Oil and Gas Journal. Eric, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
In Dubai of the United Arab Emirates, Adam Schreck, Associated Press business writer. Adam, good to hear from you.
You too, Scotty.
All right. From Moscow, Andrew Kramer, New York Times correspondent specializing in the Russian economic mainstay, oil and energy. Andrew, good to have you back on the show.
Thank you.
And from New York, Mark Schenk, who covers oil and gas stories for Bloomberg News. Mark, we're glad to have you with us.
Hello. Thanks a lot.
Good. Eric, I'm going to start with you with the gross oversimplification. I know it is, which is to ask why it is that oil that's still in the ground is costing us more money at the pump here in the United States.
Well, I think you put your finger on a very key point, and that is that people often talk about the relationship between supply and demand as determining price. And I think that in terms of, old-style economics, that's probably true. But there's also something that I refer to often as perceived supply and perceived demand. And that's really where the markets operate. No one's for sure exactly what the demand is. No one's for sure exactly what the supply is. So as soon as questions start to come up about one side or the other or both, then prices begin to move up and down.
Adam, I wanted to ask you. You've been you're there in the heart of oil land, and you've spent some time covering recent stories in Saudi and also in Bahrain. What is your perspective here? What's going to happen?
That's the big question, I guess. What's going to happen? But I mean, in terms of oil, I think the thing you need to keep in mind is that as your other guest said, the question is that what is going to come next? And for traders, it's a cliche, but they really hate uncertainty. And so when it's unclear what the political situation on the ground is, they're not going to wait around to things to get better before they try to drive up the price. In the Middle East, we've got a lot of different conflicts going on right now. Of course, Libya, as you mentioned, also now Yemen, Syria. So things are really heating up, as well as Bahrain, which is not a major oil producer, but it's very close to Saudi Arabia and sort of is seen as a proxy for Saudi Arabia, at least in the oil market.
And Andrew, while we haven't been paying close attention, Russia has become the giant, along with Saudi Arabia, in the oil and gas industry. From the Russian perspective, do things look pretty good because of the Middle East uncertainty?
Absolutely. I think Russia is really the largest winner in this situation. It's a free rider on OPEC, so that it never has to cut back its own production to benefit from high prices. And during a period of uncertainty in the Middle East, like now, Russia really reaps a great financial windfall.
Great. Thank you so
much. Mark Schenk, what is the price of per barrel of the kind of oil that's coming into the Western world these days?
Well, the U.S. benchmark is at about $106 a barrel. So we're very close to where we were. We reached a high 2 weeks ago, and that's the highest since before the recession.
And we reached a high 2 weeks ago, so that would indicate that it's somewhat lower now?
Well, yeah, we got to $106.95. So we're not very far from it.
So, Eric, how did that happen? How does as things seem to be getting worse? How does the price per barrel go down?
Well, again, this is really a trader's question, and one of the things that's been happening is that first you see the price going up, spiking at a certain point because of Libya and other kinds of things. The worries really about ultimately people are worried about the big producers like Saudi Arabia. So that's where I say they're talking about perceived supply. They're talking about what could happen down the road.
Okay.
But in terms of bringing the price down over the past couple of days, one of the major points has been Japan. Japan's sort of nuclear problems where they have most of their energy run off nuclear power. That's come down, and that's brought that they're also not using as much oil and gas out there, and so that's brought demand down. I think it's about 5 billion. I don't know the exact figure in Japan, but the story is that the problems in Japan have reduced demand on oil, and therefore the price has come down a bit. But then again, looking toward the summer, it could come back up because Japanese demand will be up.
Let's dig down a little bit to the unsteady political situation that is behind a lot of this discussion, at least in terms of the Middle Eastern oil producers. Adam, what are you observing there? You're based in Dubai, but I know that you travel all around the region.
Well, it's a broad area. As you said, I'm based in Dubai, which is a very modern city and very quiet in terms of the unrest. I was recently in Bahrain, which is a small island kingdom very near to Saudi Arabia. It was one of the first producers of oil in the Persian Gulf, but not considered a major producer these days. What's happening there, though, just to give you one country to look at in the region, is you've got kind of a state of emergency effective that's been declared by the government. There's sort of a sectarian divide there between a Shia majority and a Sunni minority. The Sunni minority, though, happens to be the ones in power. And so what you're seeing there is sort of continued low-level unrest that has Saudi Arabia, which is obviously the region's major oil producer, very concerned because it sees what's happening in Bahrain as something it does not want to spread to its shores. And Bahrain is only a causeway ride away from Saudi Arabia, so that's the concern there.
Eric, just double back to you for a moment. You were mentioning before we came on the air that you spent about 25 years in the region, including Yemen and in Saudi Arabia. What is life like in an oil economy?
Well, I'll tell you, it's very interesting, and you're talking about two very different oil economies there between Saudi Arabia and Yemen. The period of time I spent in Saudi Arabia was a remarkable time. It was back in the early 80s. Oil was really beginning to make itself felt, at least oil revenue in the country. And I remember watching roads being constructed in 24 hours. It was like they were just coming in and spray painting the city with roads and buildings and so forth. By contrast, in Yemen, which is a very small producer, tiny producer now, it's just under 300,000 barrels a day, you didn't see much in the way of economic benefit for the people in general. And that's been going on for years. They've been a producer since, I'd say the early to mid-'80s. And it bumped up a little bit in the 90s, and now it's gone back down. But you don't see much change in the per capita income of most people in Yemen. It's a tough place to live.
So it's we can draw maybe some parallels to the lack of distribution that's occurred in Libya, for example.
Yes, I think so, and I think this is part of the problem throughout the region is that some people are saying these are political problems, and they certainly are showing themselves as political problems, but underneath you're looking at economic problems, lack of economic opportunity for the vast majority of people, poor distribution networks, cronyism. You talk about it, it's there. Libya has those problems too.
Andrew, the Russian diplomacy is very much based on petropolitics, at least in the European sector of the world. If major problems occurred in terms of the oil supply in the Middle East, how much of the slack could Russia really take up?
Well, Russia is not actually in a position to immediately take up much slack because of the nature of their industry. Most of the Russian oil is produced in Siberia. It's very expensive both to produce and also to ship to markets via the Black Sea, the Baltic Sea, or a pipeline into Europe. And the Russians generally don't keep a spare capacity in their system, so they're producing at full blast all the time. So in a situation like this, an American consumer couldn't count on Russia to open more valves, say, and bring more oil into the global market to alleviate prices. So their position really is sort of a base supply. Although they're a very large supplier, they can't boost supply quickly. What I think Russia's position in global oil supplies in light of the unrest in the Middle East is that Russia looks now comparatively more stable as an investment destination for oil companies. So if they come in and invest in new fields and new pipelines and liquefied natural gas plants and so on, in a few years from now, Russia could potentially become a larger producer and marginally supplant some of the supply from the Middle East.
And a fair number of those oil and natural gas fields are actually in Siberia and in rather chilly parts of the Russian tundra. Is that the case?
Yeah, that is, and it actually has an effect on Russia's oil policies because they can't turn off their wells. In permafrost, they say the well would freeze solid in a cold winter climate, and so where Saudi Arabia has the option of turning off wells and turning them back on to modulate their output and have an effect on global prices, the Russians say this would be too expensive in their cold climate, and they have to have the wells turned on all the time.
Mark Schenk, I'm going to get to you in just a moment to ask more about the American situation here. But before we continue this discussion, I want to remind our listeners that you can view or listen to this program by downloading our podcasts at globaljournalist.org. And that includes the online discussions and features that continue after our half-hour show. You also can send us questions or comments, care of Global Journalist Program at gmail.com, all one word, or look us up on Facebook. And now let's get back. Here in the U.S., Mark Schenk from Bloomberg News, can you give me an assessment of just is the answer drill, baby, drill here in the United States?
Well, U.S. production has been trending upwards, both in North Dakota, the Gulf, and Canada's become a large supplier. So there's big increases in Alberta. So really there isn't a supply problem in the U.S. right now. And our other major sources are Mexico, Venezuela. So we don't get very much oil from the Middle East.